Technicians of Spaceship Earth, welcome back to Hawkbinge, where we party like it's 1999, one album at a time, in the company of a long-term fan, which is me, and your favourite first-time listener, which is Matt. Hello, Matt.
Hello, Andy. It has been a minute.
Indeed. We've both got about 10 years older, I think, since the last one.
I don't know what happened to this year. I feel like I blinked after shipping Distant Horizons and things seem to have happened to have just eaten up our lives.
Absolutely. Whenever one of us has had some free time, the other one has been deep in the mire. And a lot of the times we've both been deep in the mire. This has been a chaotic year. But I've gone through the year thinking, well, we've just come off the back of two positive, cool episodes in the new album that came out and then the unexpectedly positive Distant Horizons. And then I realized we're not really coming off the back of those things anymore because they're like 9 months ago. But we are back, and we aim to be back somewhat more regularly if we can sort our lives out for next year. And we have some interesting things lined up for the next few episodes, our wrap-ups and things like this. So more to come, and hopefully more Hawkbinge next year. This is an interesting episode because, generally speaking, Hawkwind have a lot of these oddity albums where you're not entirely sure if it's a studio album or if it isn't. And we got out of having to make any decisions about what we would include in what we call the canon studio album run by delegating all of our decisions to Wikipedia so that nobody could criticize us for the choices that get made. And I freely admit this is one I would not have included in the canon studio album run, but Wikipedia does. And so we are committing to the decision that was made. And as you said before we went on air, live by the Wikipedia sword, die by the Wikipedia sword. So here we are doing In Your Area. But we have found a cool way to do this because, as listeners will know, other than the big bonus shows that we've done around big key live albums that were very cool, we don't tend to do the live albums because the live albums are comprised of tracks that we've already spoken about, and it's a little more outside of the areas that we want to go in. And this has a whole side of live music. So we have covered that with a very, very special guest. Given that we'll probably put it on socials before the episode airs, you'll know.
Even if he's not a surprise guest, he's a special guest.
A very, very special guest coming to you later in the show to talk about the live side. And that means that we're doing the live side second, although the live side is side A. We're going to do the studio side first in our traditional Hawkbinge way before getting into a bit of a chat about the live side and lots of other fun things with our special secret kind of guest later on. Firstly, Matt, I'm guessing you've listened to one or two other albums than In Your Area in that time.
I have, and the first one I'm going to add to our famous Turntable Pick playlists is a new discovery for me. I collect a lot of records and I watch a lot of bands and I listen to a lot of music. So for something to come along and totally floor me is quite rare, but I'm very glad to say I found something this year which totally did that. The artist's name is Headache, and they produce this achingly nostalgic, down-tempo synthwave kind of music that reflects early rave chill-out rooms and the formation of indie breakbeat, while this corrupted AI voice talks over the top in this off-kilter diction that's somewhere between The Streets and Andy Zaltzman. The lyrics are almost David Shrigley-esque collections of snatched thought, all non-sequitur one-liners like "my favourite meal is sandwiches," and suggesting potential winning lottery numbers in the middle of a large soliloquy.
Genius.
The wild imagination on show is enchanting, and it always keeps me on my mental toes when I listen to it. If that's piqued anyone's interest, I would really recommend it. I could pick any track, so I'm just going to pick the first one and say if you like it, there are 8 more politely lining up after it. So the track is 1965 by Headache on the Please Make It Ruins label, and the album is called Thank You for Almost Everything.
Well, that sounds amazing and always good to discover new things, particularly when they're as out of the box as that sounds. Got a pretty out of the box one for you as well. I went to see Melvins on their tour. I saw them twice on the tour, once in Brighton, once in London, both at quite small venues. Melvins are interesting in as much as I kind of love Melvins and I always try and catch them when they tour, but I don't actually have much in the way of like vinyl of theirs, and I haven't listened to them an awful lot outside of seeing them live. They've always been this weird space for me. And they were so good on this tour with the 2-drummer lineup that I thought I must remedy this. It's past time when I should look at the actual albums and get deeper into this. So I put a playlist together of the set list they did, and then used the tracks as jumping off points to get deeper into the albums. And all the tracks were listed as Melvins, as writers, except for one, which was listed as Melvins and Lustmord. And Lustmord is a very experimental electronics guy. He's done a huge amount of stuff. I have almost none of it apart from one record, which is suitably weird. So the prospect of Lustmord and Melvins having done a track that I subsequently found was an album they'd done in 2004 with the fantastic title of Pigs of the Roman Empire. And Pigs of the Roman Empire is my turntable pick. It's on Ipecac, which is Mike Patton's label, which only makes it go up in my estimation. But these tracks, they're not Melvins and Lustmord in a studio making music together. It's more Melvins doing Melvin stuff and sending it to Lustmord, who might do something with it or might do something just of his own and send it back to Melvins. So the tracks on the album are mostly either Melvins tracks that Lustmord may have looked at as they went past him, Lustmord tracks that Melvins haven't done anything with, or about 3 or 4 tracks where Melvins have sent something to Lustmord and he's actually done something that gives him a big presence in the track. And you go, oh, this is both of them, which sounds like a real mess given who they are, but it really works. It's a fantastic album. I really got into it. And the track that I've picked is called The Bloated Pope.
Super interesting. My second turntable pick is another exciting discovery towards the end of the year for me called X-1. X-1 is a 2-piece hailing from the south of England, I believe. They combine hardware synthesizers with software programming and live drums to create these really large, foreboding soundscapes, but with lots of interest and character. They claim to be inspired by atom punk, this retro-futuristic science fiction of the 50s and 60s as depicted in magazines such as Analog and Astounding. My reference for this would be like if the video game series Fallout went off its meds and became totally feral. So I'm a big fan. This is their debut EP, but I hope they do more. Of the 3 tracks currently available, I'm adding The Futurist to the turntable picks with its icy tones, deep buzzing bass drones, and tense cymbal washes. As I said in my review, it's music to play when you want to sit down and watch the world go die.
Wow, that is the ultimate reference right there. I can tell you, I happen to know they are developing music for their second album.
You're good friends with one of the people in the band, I believe.
I'm very good friends with one of the people in the band because it is me. Yes, me and a drummer. So thanks very much to Matt for that completely unprompted call out for X-1.
Andy didn't know I was going to do that, everyone.
No.
So hopefully everyone can enjoy that nice little bit of surprise. But that said, all nepotism aside, it's a really cool EP. It's definitely worth checking out. There's still hardware available. You can still get wax.
Yes, there are still a few vinyl albums left, and we'll be doing shows in the fairly early part of next year. That's the plan.
I'm looking forward to actually getting over to seeing one. I haven't yet to have the pleasure, but that is definitely one of the many reasons why it's taken a long time to get this episode done. In the meantime of just being busy and, being in different parts of the world as we are, you suddenly decided to become a touring band person as well. Just ate into the even smaller bits of free time that we have.
And as you can imagine, we released the album, I think, in March or April, and we've played precisely 2 gigs. Simply because we can't find space when both of us can do it. So actually, I've found myself in the Hawkbinge situation with X-1. Funny enough, when you were talking about your first turntable pick and you started off with it's a completely new discovery and it's really blown me away, it's this amazing thing. And I was sitting here thinking, oh, he's going to say X-1. And then you went, and it's Headache. And I was so disappointed.
Well, hopefully I redeemed myself.
You have indeed. Thanks very much for that. My second could not be more different from everything that we've spoken about. Part of what I love with Hawkbinge is these album stories that we get into, and I watch a lot of documentaries and behind the scenes stuff with albums. Always loved it. There's a series called Classic Albums. A lot of people out there might know it. And I don't care who the band is. It could be a band that I really have no time for whatsoever. I'm fascinated by the stories. And I was watching one, and it was Emerson, Lake and Palmer, and it was going into Tarkus. Now, I haven't heard any Emerson, Lake and Palmer albums. I knew Fanfare for the Common Man because that was huge when I was young. And I know they did rock versions of classic music like Pictures and Exhibition, Jerusalem, things like this. And I was really seriously uninterested in any of it. But in watching the documentary, I thought, let's have a listen to Tarkus. This sounds like fun. And I loved Tarkus. And by saying I loved Tarkus, I loved the track Tarkus. Side one is this 25-minute odd suite, which is Tarkus. And I thought, this is great. And I'll buy the album. I bought the album, and then I listened to the second side of the album, and I really didn't like it at all. But I played around with a few other albums, and then I came to Brain Salad Surgery, where I thought the first side wasn't very good from my ears. But then side two is the Carnival suite, which I thought, this is amazing. And I realized that if I actually got some glue and then glued the two albums together, I'd have one album where I really loved both sides. So I'm going to go with the one that actually gives us something that we can put on the playlist as a pick, because Tarkus is one track on Spotify, whereas Carnival is split into its component parts. So Brain Salad Surgery is my pick on Manticore, which is ELP's own label. And the selected track is kind of the obvious one with the big refrain in it that anybody who's heard them will know. And it also has a very ultimate track title for a prog band, which is Carnival 9 First Impression Part 1.
So jumping from us talking to you about music, we go from you talking to us about Hawkwind, Hawkbinge, and your feedback and notes on the previous shows. There's been quite a lot of posts, obviously, given the amount of time that we've been on, so I cherry-picked a few. I'll start with some responses to the last episode, Distant Horizons. John Chase on Facebook said, enjoyed your last episode about Distant Horizons. I was the photographer on the album, and it marked my first trip to the farm. I was pleased that the reissue attempted to reproduce the photos properly rather than as halftones, which I was disappointed about at the time. That's awesome to hear from you, John. Thanks so much for getting in touch. That's very, very cool.
Yeah, amazing to hear from people that are actually involved and were there at the time of these things that we talk about.
Absolutely. Carl Benson on Facebook said, I didn't buy it when it came out. Like Andy, I finally acquired a copy of the 2LP vinyl release. I was underwhelmed on first listen, but over time I've warmed to it considerably. It's certainly not the worst album. That episode is yet to arrive. Jed Hall on YouTube commented, I'm seriously impressed you found so much to discuss and in such a positive way. You almost tricked me into listening to it again. So swing and a miss for Jed there. JM Somebody's Brother on YouTube put up a really spirited defense of the track Taxi for Max. If you remember, I think we dismissed it as irritating noise.
Oh, yeah, we did.
He said, you get the crystalline shimmerings of some high-end shopping mall somewhere like Hong Kong or Singapore, which are then shattered by a random act of vandalism, after which the culprit saunters off whistling. It's been another false paradise. Was the vandalism an act of rebellion or just wanton damage? Well played on hearing all that in a track we somewhat dismissed. Comments like that make me want to listen even harder to everything on every album and really get into everything that they do, no matter how small.
Absolutely. And I've got to say, what I love about that is that it makes it so clear that what might be unlistenable to one person is beautiful and amazing and deep to somebody else. I've never really got any time for this music is rubbish or this band isn't any good or whatever. You can only ever talk about your own subjective experience. I wouldn't have thought anyone would do that for Taxi for Max. So that's comment of the year for me.
Dan Harmon, who's a writer, he always said there's no good and bad, there's just joyful and joyless.
Nice.
That always stuck with me as a way to think about any kind of media or entertainment or input. Sometimes it's not always joyful, but that doesn't mean that it's joyless or that you can't change your mind about it, where good and bad become a very different way of talking about it.
Absolutely.
Music Jackdaw on YouTube said, by the time this came out, I had given up even listening to their new stuff. Alien 4 had killed it for me. Yet now, having listened from the start of the Hawkbinge podcasts, I have found that I am not as averse to the 90s output. Alien 4 still doesn't do it for me, but I enjoyed White Zone and most of Distant Horizons. So that was someone who wasn't immune like Jed.
Yeah, I'd chalk that up as a win.
And then on the other side, Michael Horton said, I'm really, really surprised that Matt enjoyed this as much as he did. I was sure he'd just have his mouth open in disbelief for its entirety. So I think Distant Horizons definitely got some quite polarizing but ultimately positive chat.
I'd only heard negativity to Distant Horizons before we recorded, and I wasn't sure what the response was going to be, but I almost feel like people are no longer afraid to come out of the closet and put their hand up and say, I like Distant Horizons, and that makes me happy.
A couple of other things quickly that I noticed while going through. Phil W. on YouTube commented on the Live 79 episode. Love the ending of this episode. Informative and entertaining as always. Enjoyed my trip with Hawkbinge through the 70s, now onto the 80s. I hope you get as far as the 90s to hear this. Welcome aboard, Phil W. And a big thanks to Alan Price on Facebook, who said, hey, I sure miss you guys. Hope you're keeping well. Also hope for a Christmas present like a new episode. So, assuming I get this edited in time, Merry Christmas, Alan.
Happy Christmas, Alan.
And finally, something that has been on the web since 2023, but only just discovered by me, is a review of Hawkbinge by Steve Litchfield on his own website. He's a tech writer, but made an exception for our little show, as far as I can see. And he said this about the first-time listener, long-term fan format that we have. It's fascinating hearing someone else's thoughts on tracks he's never heard before, even though they were recorded almost half a century ago. He concluded, while I don't agree with all his assessments so far, I'm not at all fond of the 80s drum production from Sonic Attack through to Xenon Codex, for example. There's far more agreement than disagreement, thankfully, and the podcasts make addictive listening if you're a Hawkwind fan. So thanks for spending so much time talking about us, Steve Litchfield. That was fun to read, and let's hope that we become a little less of a occasional podcast in the future.
Absolutely. And I've got an additional one to throw in, which is a big shout out to Neil Tupman, because Neil has found Hawkbinge to be in his Spotify Wrapped, which is remarkable. He's listened to 3,116 minutes of Hawkbinge in this calendar year and survived to tell the tale. He's an Iron Man of Hawkbinge. Well done, Neil. And on that note, let's get into 1999 and the time at which In Your Area was released. 1999 is a very, very interesting time for music. It's the year that Napster launches. So in many ways, this is the year that everything changed, although it didn't change overnight. But a lot of things that people were saying in 1999 about Napster have very much been borne out 26 years later. Metallica, I remember, being very anti-Napster. At the time, I thought very negatively of that, but now I kind of look back and think maybe they had a point. There are lots of albums released in 1999. It's the year of Britney Spears' Baby One More Time. It's the year that Blondie released their first album in 17 years called No Exit. Underworld released Boku Fish. Dimmu Borgir, Spiritual Black Dimensions, very big shreddy black metal band, so a sign of what's coming. XTC, Apple Venus Volume 1 is their 13th album. Kula Shaker released an album, Peasants, Pigs and Astronauts. Stereophonics, Performance and Cocktails. Blur released 13. Porcupine Tree released Stupid Dream, which is one of their early records, but you can kind of see Porcupine Tree becoming what they were going to become at that point. Aphex Twin, probably one of yours, Matt, I would think, the famous Window Licker EP. Gua, probably not one of your things, We Kill Everything. Ghost release Snuffbox Imminence, and I had no idea Ghost went back that far. Fantomas released Fantomas. Moby releases Play, which is one of the most seminal albums. Backstreet Boys, Millennium. Travis, The Man Who. I wonder what happened to Travis. Chemical Brothers released Surrender. Linkin Park released Hybrid Theory. Blink-182, Enema of the State. Def Leppard released Euphoria, so they're past their peak at that point, but still releasing albums with titles that sound like Hysteria. Mr. Bungle, California, great album. Beck, Midnight Vultures. Machine Head, The Burning Red. Jethro Tull released jtull.com, which is clearly their attempt to be current and edgy. I have a feeling it failed. Burning Spear, Calling Rastafari. Gomez, Liquid Skin. Supergrass released Supergrass, so that again plants me firmly back in 1999. Nine Inch Nails, The Fragile. S Club 7, God Help Us All, release S Club. The Fall, still releasing a lot of albums. The Marshall Suite. Opeth, Still Life, one of their big ones, I think. Cannibal Corpse, Bloodthirst, which I put in purely because I like saying Cannibal Corpse. Stone Temple Pilots, release number 4. Westlife, release Westlife. Rage Against the Machine, The Battle of Los Angeles. Now there is a significant release, if ever there was one. Dre releases 2001. Prince, Rave Unto the Joy, fantastic. Not one I know from Prince, but given that it's 1999, he had to be in there somewhere. And Kitty, who I don't know how much about Kitty anyone will know, but I really like Kitty. They're an all-female, very heavy, thrashy metal band, and this was their debut EP. But mainly in this era, it's the singles that stand out as marking the territory of the era as they do. And this is a truly awful time for hit singles. We have Baby One More Time by Britney Spears, which is given the honour of launching teen pop. Livin' La Vida Loca, Ricky Martin, key song in the Latin pop wave, apparently. Genie in a Bottle by Christina Aguilera. Mambo Number 5 by Lou Bega. No Scrubs by TLC. Smooth by Santana featuring Rob Thomas, which apparently was a crossover success, but I don't know who Rob Thomas is, so I don't know what Santana is crossing over with at that point. Probably nothing good. And Believe by Cher, notable for its groundbreaking use of auto-tune, so therefore a crime. So not a great year, 1999 for singles there, I would say. I'll take Taxi for Max over all of that. So there you go. Hopefully you're back in the wonderful musical world of 1999 at this point and ready for our dive into In Your Area. So where are Hawkwind at this point? In the band is the lineup from Distant Horizons, Mr. Dave Brock at the helm, Richard Chadwick, Ron Tree, who has taken over the bass duties at this point, and Jerry Richards. And on tour with them, which is significant for the live side of this album, are Captain Riz and Julian Crumb Crimmins, who plays keyboards. Captain Riz does some kind of toasting, I believe it's called, well out of my comfort zone. Definitely, Matt knows more about this than I. The live side was recorded live in Belgium on November the 20th, 1997, and the studio side was recorded at Dave Brock's Earth Studios in 1998. It's released on January the 5th, 1999 on Griffin in the US, and in the UK on Voiceprint a year later. So we could have done this as a 2000 album. But its first appearance is 1999. The interesting thing about this to me is that on the 11th of January 1999, they released Hawkwind 1997. The live side is recorded on the Distant Horizons tour. Hawkwind 1997 is an entire album of the Distant Horizons tour. So it's one of those weird, very Hawkwind oddities for me, that you've got an official document of 1997 live tour in Hawkwind 1997, but then you put out one side of live music from that tour 6 days earlier than you released that, with some studio bits on the first side. We have a couple of things people have written about this from our regular authors, Carol Clark in her mighty The Saga of Hawkwind, and the amazing Ian Abrams, writer of Hawkwind Sonic Assassins. But in Sonic Assassins, Ian doesn't get too much into In Your Area specifically. It's kind of part of the overall journey through the 90s into the 2000s. But there is a very, very excellent edition of Record Collector magazine. Record Collector presents Hawkwind, Masters of the Universe, where they delve into like every album. They've got a number of contributors. And in this, Ian actually writes a full page about In Your Area. So well done, Ian. That's an incredible feat. So we will be drawing from this for Ian's thoughts and some of his documents of what was going on with In Your Area. One very short thing that Ian says in here is Ron Tree's reflection on In Your Area as an album so we could have a few quid. We didn't get paid a right lot. So not massively profound. Ian actually writes here, the studio tracks would hopefully lift the spirits of diehard fans after the widespread disappointment of Distant Horizons. Largely, they were dashed hopes, unfortunately. So Ian's not massively into In Your Area. And while we love Distant Horizons, and we've talked about a number of people who have come out and said they really like it, at the time, he's right, it was something of a disappointment. However, in Carol Clark's book, there's a very different tone around the release of this album. As she says, following Distant Horizons, there was much more of a buzz around In Your Area, part of which was recorded live on the last date of the 1997 tour at the Brussels Ancien Belgique on November the 20th. I really like that album, says Jerry Richards. It's more exploratory. The legendary Malcolm Dome, reviewing In Your Area in Classic Rock, agreed. He wrote, vibrant, coherent, yet also adventurous and madcap. This is exactly the sort of album that reaffirms Hawkwind's perennial preeminence. And so that sets the scene for Hawkwind. There is a particularly amazing story that happens during this time where they're going to play a festival in the US. And Ron is refused entry to the US. I would guess drugs are probably at play here. They're at play in most things that Hawkwind do with the police. Dave is also not allowed in for other reasons that I can't actually remember. So Hawkwind play the festival with two people from a Hawkwind tribute band, and it's Strange Fest they play, and the lineup's gone down as being known as Strange Wind, and the whole thing is really well documented in Ian's book, Sonic Assassins. It's just pure Hawkwind, this. So they're obviously in a very, very interesting place at this point, and that is the place where Matt will pick them up to give us his view on the studio side of In Your Area.
This album is a literal mixed bag in that it is a mix of the studio tracks and a live set. Arguably, that's not super surprising because bands have been offering live and studio tracks in albums before, but in my experience, they don't normally start with the live stuff. They normally have those as more bonus tracks towards the end. So starting with the live stuff is definitely a choice. There's also not a clear split between the live and studio experiences when you listen, so it can be consumed as one very strange journey. I don't know if maybe that's the point. If so, I'm not quite sure what the band is trying to say with it. It's not even really made obvious on the back of the album or anything for you to realise, there's no fate side and space side, for example, for you to really understand that there's two bits. So the whole thing in every way has a slight ramshackle feeling to it. I'm disappointed that Hawkwind don't sound better live than compared to Live Chronicles. If anything, I would say that Live Chronicles is a better live recording than In Your Area, and that was 12 years ago. I find the guitars faded and lacking clarity, the vocals rise up and down and drop in volume drastically as the singers move closer and further away from the microphones, I'm guessing, and the drums are there but they're not really making their presence felt. The synths sound pretty clear, but as they don't need to be mic'd up, I'm assuming they're just plugged straight into a mixer, so I'd be surprised if they hadn't been. From the studio part of the album, the sound, I guess, is better, but honestly, if you told me this was still part of the live recording, I probably could have believed you, considering you don't really hear the crowd again, which is something that Hawkwind never really mic up the crowd, so you don't get that really live atmosphere. And for me, if you're going to have a live recording, I feel like you want the atmosphere. Otherwise, all you're doing is recording a bit of a substandard performance, because you can never mic a live experience up to what you can do if you're a studio. So then you might as well pump in all the crowd, all the atmosphere, all the call and response, and all the things that make it a show and you can feel like you're in it. But without that, I feel like you are always listening to a performance that's going to be kneecapped in some way. The fact that the studio doesn't sound much better was surprising. It's not that many as well, that side. There's none that go over 6 minutes in length, so they're not big, expansive Hawkwind exploration pieces. Most of them are single length, if that. It does feel a little scrapbooky, a little here are the tracks that we were playing with, but maybe we don't have a huge amount of faith in. The whole thing is a bit of an enigma, and it's been difficult. Not only has it been that we've had very difficult schedules to try and meet up to talk about this album, even trying to listen to it enough to get infused in some way and not just be a massive downer episode has been tricky. On the whole, this has been some work, and certainly after the surprise, in a way, that we were able to unlock Distant Horizons, no amount of listening, re-listening, listening in any type of way has really saved this as an experience.
It's been tricky. I mean, also, neither of us have this on physical media, and it's not available to us on streaming. So actually, we're slightly indebted to whoever Charlie Morrison is, who's got it as a playlist on YouTube, which is how we've been listening to it.
What's really funny as well is that one of the tracks that was uploaded clearly from a CD has a skip in it.
Yes, exactly.
So we haven't even been able to listen to it 100% as Hawkwind intended.
It's given us the illusion of physical media.
Very much so. I kind of liked it.
It is a strange one. Your point about if the whole album is a live album and they've taken the crowd out, which most of these Hawkwind live albums do, then I'm fine with it because I've bought into what that is. But the interesting thing on this one is that we actually had to look up where the split was, because it's not obvious. There's I Am the Reptoid and then the Nazca, and it's like, okay, is it half and half? And we had to look this up, which might make us sound really stupid to people who've listened to this album an awful lot and are really familiar with it. But I don't think we're alone in the difference between the live side and the studio side not really coming through in the sound. On the studio side, which is obviously the focus of this part of the podcast, there's a track or two on here, certainly one, that feel like finished tracks that you could release. And then there's a lot of things which remind me of the kinds of things you would have found on, say, Church of Hawkwind. That sound very different because this is a 90s sound versus that early 80s thing, but similar in them feeling like, used to say it sounded like a mixtape of ideas, some more well-rounded than others. And it feels a bit like that, given the live release that happens like a week later. A live release that, by the way, Jerry Richards was particularly really, really happy with. He said it was the album he was most proud of. I can't remember which book I read that in, but one of them. It's a strange release on that note. But obviously, we then listen to it, take the tracks as they are. We ended up, I remember, from Church of Hawkwind, being actually largely positive about Church of Hawkwind if you meet it on its own merits.
Yeah.
Then there are some interesting things in it around a bunch of things that feel a little bit more throwaway. That's my takeaway from the now many times that I've listened to this. So let's get into it, Matt. And you've got an interesting story to tell about the Nazca.
As a little separation between the live and studio parts of the album, it's a nice little bit of atmosphere, this track. You know, it's simple and sinister, evoking something, like you said, from Church or their late 70s stuff, which I think is cool. What drives the track is what sounds like a sample from a TV or radio show. It's a woman's voice with a slightly out-of-phase distortion on it, like we're hearing it through an old telephone or something. And it says, "Intelligent life is so very rare, the rarest thing in creation, but the most precious. It is the only thing that gives meaning to the universe. Without it, nothing begins, nothing ends." And once I heard that, I thought, I need to find out where this comes from, just like when I heard that obscure film sample on White Zone. So I started with the track title itself, which seems to reference these huge land sculptures from Peru from around 500 BC and only makes sense if seen from the air, which some people use as evidence of extraterrestrial visitations, but that took me nowhere in my search. So I broadened my search from recorded sci-fi films and shows, which eventually got me onto a Reddit thread about sci-fi literature, and it turns out the words are from a book called Chucky, originally produced in 1963 as a short story for Amazing Stories by British author John Wyndham. The story is about a young boy in a normal middle-class neighbourhood who gets contacted across space by a psychic alien in search of new planets to colonise. I then found the BBC produced a radio adaptation in 1967, so I thought the recording sample must be from that. So I managed to find a copy of it, but it's not there. Then I found that ITV made a children's TV show based on the novel in 1984, so I found that, and it's not there either. So my current conclusion at time of broadcast is that Hawkwind found the words and got someone to do a reading of it for the album. So it's not a sample, it's more of an excerpt. Again, I can't prove that because I can't find any evidence of it anywhere or in the CD notes or anything. So not quite as satisfying a conclusion as White Zone, but an interesting journey nonetheless.
Indeed. If anybody out there knows, then do let us know. The interesting thing is that I was aware of Chocky. When I was at school, there were things like Chocky, Children of the Stones, Village of the Damned, Day of the Triffids, all knocking around at the same time. So I remembered when you said Chocky, I was like, oh yeah, I remember that. But I had no idea this would have come from it. So yeah, interesting. Well done, Detective Matt. As for the track itself, I quite liked it. For me, this could have been longer. But as it stands, as you say, it's a nice little introduction to the studio side.
We end on this chaotic riser which cuts abruptly, which for me is a good way of setting up the studio part of the album because it's the first time you actually have silence, which kind of makes you feel like, okay, now you can reset your brain.
Yes, exactly. And having reset our brains, we come to probably, quote unquote, the big track on the album, which is Hippie. And in his page-long entry on In Your Area, Ian Abrahams says, Hippie is a genuinely strong piece, which was added to the live set the following year, and might have been a pointer to a successful rethink of tone and style, a new vibe that guitarist Jerry Richards described as crawling, screaming acid rock from this crazy old band called Hawkwind. The new direction that Ron and I and Richard, to a large extent, were keen to push. So, Matt, Hippie.
Yeah, as the title of the track would suggest, Hippie is a much different vibe to the live stuff. It does open with this lush, optimistic bass and sustained guitar with gentle taps from a hand drum and a vocal which sounds like it's halfway between a tribal chant and speaking in tongues somehow, so immediately you're switching gears tonally. And then it breaks out into this spacey vibe which feels both pacey due to the way the guitar's strummed, but also quite languid thanks to the long spaces between changes in notation. I can see the lava lamp projections on the walls of a smoky, small club in Camden when this gets into its stride. This is the first track in the whole album that puts me somewhere, that I feel I can start to get lost in. Personally, I don't know if it needs the vocal element to come back in. Maybe it would have felt too thin if it didn't, but the chanting makes this reappearance and turns into a more assertively sung vocal when the babbling kind of finally turns into English. And I don't know, the vocal sounds, I don't know if it's off key, but I can't quite put my finger on why I'm not a fan of it. I think the main thing is it doesn't feel integrated into the track. It sounds like it's laying on top of it somehow. And so I feel like a lot of my attention is drawn towards it. And seeing as I was liking the instrumentation so much, the fact that the vocal is interrupting that is not my favourite thing. I wish maybe the instrumentation had gone on a little bit longer, so at least I would have got my fill of that before it made the change. But as a track, it actually goes through quite a lot of changes. There's this, I know you said acid rock, but for me, I called it a deserty breakdown after the vocals come in, which give us this heavier, detuned feeling. We start talking about the elemental mind, which I quite like. It's a nice idea. And then the post breakdown is almost giving Unplugged vibes, where they start plucking the guitar before they rev back up into this more rocky version of the first part. I like this whispered earth, air, fire, water. Kind of reminds me of the triangle, square, waves repeated theme going on. And then we go into the second doomy breakdown, and then what I would say is the track's final form, when it remains quite dark. And it's okay for me. The lyrics feel like the words are there mainly because they rhyme over any real story or thought. Maybe the primalness of the piece makes that work. It sounds like the shouts of a chaotic shaman while the music spins around him. It's not a story, it's just words. You're almost being attacked by it. Like the album itself, this track is a game of two halves. I think the juxtaposition between both parts keeps the track feeling dynamic, but overall I feel like it's not fully coming together yet. Do I like it more than the live stuff? Yes, but that's also a low bar to clear. Maybe this track is a sign that the band are still arguing a little bit over the sound that they want to make, because it is quite spacey and peaceful and vibey, but at the same time gets quite crushing and chaotic and tribal. So I feel like if you split these two tracks in half, that might have been better. I'm not quite sure why it was eventually called Hippie. I feel like Hippie on a bad day or Hippie accidentally stumbles into a fire circle or something. It might have maybe set up the idea of the track a little more. But yeah, generally I like it. It's probably one of the most strongest things that's on this album, even if it's still a little unfinished and rough around the edges. But there's bits of it which I do enjoy. So it's a solid, if not great, track in my final estimation.
I'm actually much bigger on this track than you. I really like this. I agree that if this was quote unquote canon studio album, you'd probably want some of the rough edges smoothed out a bit. But this is the track that belongs on a full on canon studio album. And to me, you could put this track on any of the 90s albums as a rule and it would fit and probably improve them. The riff at the beginning is really interesting. To me, it said British indie chart. And I was thinking of bands like Echo and the Bunnymen. Now, I haven't listened to anything by Echo and the Bunnymen for a very long time. So if you actually listen to Echo and the Bunnymen, you might go, what an absolutely ludicrous comparison to make. But the essence of this dreamy indie guitar, the 5-note little guitar riff at the beginning, I really like that. And then I think because I'm bought into that and I go with it, I'm happy to go with the track on the rest of its journey. The big manifestation part that happens, I quite like it as it gets more aggressive. And to you, the earth, wind, fire, water, can't remember which way around they do it.
Earth, air, fire, water.
Earth, air, fire, water. Yep, I like that. I'm desperately grateful that this track is on the record because the existence of this track on the record makes this album available to be listened to multiple times. Putting it on repeatedly, the existence of something like Hippie makes that much, much easier to do. The title feels throwaway to me. They could have given this a title with a bit more gravitas and the track would stand out more as a result in the context of the overall canon rather than just this record. So I like Hippie. I genuinely like it on its own merits as opposed to it being better than the rest of this album. I actually objectively like it outside the context of the rest of the stuff on the record. I don't know what its release history is, whether it was released as a single or as a B-side or what. But yeah, a nice one for me. And we get to a complete change of tempo and we get Prairie, which our final reading from Ian says, the gentle lilts of Prairie make for a charming but brief instrumental rumination. Just a small note there, but an accurate one, Matt?
Yeah, this was a very unexpected piece. It's quite pretty, really. It has a very old-school folky vibe to it, but with some modern effects, like the little reverse delay line that comes and goes throughout to make it feel contemporary. It's a nice, delicate little progression. The guitar and bass come together at the beginning of every 4 bars to give that satisfying feeling of unity before they start to dance around each other a bit more, leaving lots of space for that echo and shimmer to hold it all together. And then the delicate tap drums also add a little texture without overpowering the rest of the piece. I think it's very nice. I think Prairie's a good name for it. Not for the first time. It feels like Hawkwind doing contemporary video game music. I know I've called that out a few times, but if this was the music that was played when you travelled to a friendly inn in a role-playing game or something, it would do a great job of making you relax and feel out of danger. I guess you could call this a Hawkwind blip track, as they're now famous for doing, but it feels long for that, and it also feels more complete than that. They faded out, so possibly they didn't know what else to do with it, but I'm glad they shared it with us for the short time that it's around. It feels more like the kind of thing you could throw into a mixtape, where I don't think this whole album feels as mixtapey as something like White Zone. I would say this is more scrapbooky, which is not as considered as a mixtape, but as a little unexpected pretty piece, it's nice. I like it.
Yeah, indeed. And when you make comparisons to video game music, given that you really like a lot of video game music, that's quite a complimentary thing to say. I also like this quite a lot. I think it's a nice contrast to the kind of aggressive end of Hippie. And in fact, it means that on a studio side that we don't think is particularly strong, the first half of it isn't bad. You wonder whether in a future life this might have been the calm breakdown in the middle of a longer track rather than existing on its own, or whether it could have been just developed on its own merits. But as a sketch of something that could have been bigger, I'm happy that that's here. It sounds really nice and I'm happy to hear it when it comes back round each time I play it. So yeah, a nice interlude that leads us to your fantasy. Not yours specifically, Matt, but just generally your fantasy.
The beginning feels very familiar. We start with a very proto-rave sweeping pad, and out of that comes this organ-sounding keyboard voice, which we've heard before, I guess quite recently in Distant Horizons. It's very organy, keyboardy keyboard sound. Even the chords that it's playing feel quite familiar. So I'm wondering if it's playing on the Love in Space or Space Sex or something like that. You know, maybe they're taking it in a new direction with your fantasy. So it was a bit unexpected, but not necessarily unwelcome to hear again. But you don't have time to think about that for very long because those keys go away and we get this plinky, busy keyboard bass line with a very short, simple, almost arpeggiator to it. It's not very many notes, but it's doing that diddler 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 sound to it. So it's building a kind of intensity. And then Captain Riz comes back to chat over the top. And I guess spoiler warning for the live part that we're going to talk about, but as soon as Captain Riz comes, I feel myself losing enthusiasm for this track quite rapidly, sadly. The keyboards feel quite dated in their sound, even for 1999 when we're talking about things like Chemical Brothers and Moby and that kind of thing. For me, they sound like an old Sega Saturn or something, which is a video game reference which is not positive. It sounds old somehow and lacking in texture or quality or something. There's a very specific sound that it's giving me and it's not my favorite. The drums are trying to make something happen in the background, but they feel very tepid as well. They have no thwack to them again. I know I've talked about on previous albums. I don't know if it's how they've mic'd them up or something or how they want them to sound. It feels like now it must be a choice given how much they're doing it. But the whole thing feels like it's lacking something. It's lacking some oomph in the low end or something to help you physically enjoy this as much as just listening to it. The whole thing sounds like a demo to me, something you'd knock up to share with a session musician or a label exec before you go back and do it properly, but this is actually what they end up giving to us. Yeah, I find it a little incoherent, a little tepid. It rambles on for 5 minutes, not really evolving or demanding my interest, and then it quietly shows itself the door, and I'm quite happy to let the door hit it on its way out.
We're of a fairly like mind on this one. And it's interesting that you said it sounded familiar because in the notes I've written, I couldn't place any of the tracks I was trying to remember, but this just reminded me of the sound of a number of Hawkwind things that I've heard before.
Yeah.
And I just wrote down, is it something from Black Sword? Is it something from Church of Hawkwind? Is it something from Sonic Attack? I can't place it, but it's in there. And I'm pretty sure it was done really well first time round. So I found it slightly frustrating on that level because my memory wouldn't let me pick out where I'd heard it before. And it wasn't doing enough on its own merit to have a reason to be there as a standalone thing. At the end of my notes, I've written not offensive, but forgettable.
Mm-hmm.
And so Luxottica.
It's quite an abstract intro to Luxottica with this indistinct chatter, what sounds like blurry fairground music for a hot second, and then some birds, which are nice to hear again. The Hawkwind birds are back. Then you get this deep subby bass that comes in along with some of that tippy-tappy percussion that we've heard again, which is going all the way through the studio part of this album. And then over the top of that, we have this strange reverse effect keyboard or guitar, which slips and slithers around in the upper range. I think it might be a guitar, but it might be a synthetic keyboard. It's hard to tell. The arrangement of this track is very strange. It's not doing that much to demand my attention. It's just kind of there, but I do find myself getting distracted by it as it throws in an organ and distorted rumbly guitar for a moment to build itself up. But then it abruptly throws it all out and breaks down into almost silence, except for what sounds like some machinery samples before listlessly rebuilding itself into something not quite as compelling as before and then petering out. So it's an odd one for me. It feels like the start of an idea again more than a finished track. I see potential in it, but as a finished thing, it's a little disappointing. It doesn't feel like it's doing the best it can with what it has. When it finishes, I'm like, well, I guess that happened, but it's not leaving me with much to think about or dwell on.
The biggest thing I took from this is that much though I could not remember the things that were triggering my head from your fantasy, I very much remembered what was triggered in my memory from the middle of this, which is the main keyboard riff of I'm a Believer by the Monkees appears smack bang in the middle of this. And having heard it, I couldn't unhear it. I racked my brains to remember where it came from. And then when it hit me, it was such a joyous moment. Although I did know it was the Monkees quite early on. Even now, I struggle to remember what really happens at the beginning of this track, because what I've mainly written down is about the breakdown into the ambience following the I'm a Believer Monkees bit.
The breakdown into nothing is such a strange choice.
Yes, isn't it? There's quite a nice percussive thing going on at the end. And this was a track that, again, I don't hate it, but I'm kind of ambivalent over whether it's there or not, is my final takeout on Luxottica. And we've end the studio side with Diana Park.
We end on a competent note, if nothing else, with a spacey, slightly melancholic electro samba. We start with, I think, a drum machine loop, or at least part drum machine with maybe some live drums as well. What's being used as a snare sounds very like the kind of frequency modulated pulse that an early drum machine would make in order to make that kind of snarey sound. So there's definitely something electro in it, but there's also shakers and taps that could be organic or maybe sampled. It's hard to say, but it feels like it might be a mix of the two. And I quite like it when Hawkwind augment their live drums with some of the electro sounds that they can do for percussion. So I feel like we're off to an interesting start. Then the tune gets going, and like I said, it's nicely done. We get this searing, slightly crispy around the edges pad that's cutting through the midsections of your audio spectrum while a guitar jams over the top, and this subby bass plays more ponderously underneath. So you've got different feelings of rhythms, but still a nice push and pull groove between it all. And like Prairie, the bass and the guitar occasionally hit very pleasingly together, which I always find very satisfying. I think the arrangement is nice. I think the tones are nice. I think it's just strange that it's so wistful or on a slight downer to me, because I guess it didn't need to be. It's definitely choicefully notated in that way. I wondered if it was called Diana Park as a tribute to Diana, Princess of Wales, who obviously died a few years before this was released. That would make sense. The fact it's called Diana Park I was confused about, though, because the Hyde Park Memorial didn't start until 2001, but there may be other parks that I'm not aware of.
I just did live on Hawkbinge, a Google search. Having had 9 months to look this up, I've now just done it. And literally all it came up with were areas that were dedicated to Princess Diana, most of which are not called Diana Park. There's the Princess Diana Memorial Playground and things like this. There is a Princess Diana Park in Banbury, but that's about as close as you get. But when I typed in Diana Park into Google, that's what came up. It didn't come up with something, oh, it's obviously that, or even a person as a complete left field thing, a person called Diana Park, who I should have known. It is quite Princess Diana oriented, but as you say, Diana Park is an interesting title.
Yeah, that would be my reasoning for why it's kind of a wistful downer thing. Like I said, I think they do it nicely. It was just, maybe it's the last track. It ends you on a slight downer, even though I think it's got prettiness to it. And I can definitely appreciate the band coming together to make this track. And they maintain course on this track for the length of its runtime, and it eventually fades after reducing itself just to the drum pattern and the bass pulse. So it's a fitting, if slightly disappointing end to the track, which for me then creates a fitting, if slightly disappointing end to the album.
This had loungy elements to me. I don't mean in a cheesy way. I could actually imagine a band playing this at sunset on a gigantic ocean cruiser in the cocktail bar, maybe in the space cocktail bar. The lush pads, the clean guitar. I don't mean to compare it with Dave Gilmour, but that guitar tone in there. And yes, it does sound very improvised. Just the band kind of sitting down and providing a foundation for Dave or Jerry to play some guitar over the top of it for a while and kind of see where it went. There's almost a feeling with me with some of this that they were things that might have become tracks for another album, but there was a decision made to kind of start again, and they've put out what they had. It has that kind of feeling for me, which may be completely inaccurate, but that's what comes in my head listening to a lot of this. And I'm glad it ends with Diana Park rather than Luxottica or Your Fantasy, which I think would be very frustrating ways to end the album. I probably would have put Hippie further into the middle of the thing to give it some solid feel in the middle. But other than that, it's not the worst way to finish the studio side. And that is the studio side of In Your Area. as we said up front, for the live side of this, we have a massively secret and even more massively special guest. We recorded this conversation before we've recorded the chat that we're having right now. So welcome to the special guest part of Hawkbinge. And so everyone has listened to Matt and I talk about the studio side of In Your Area for quite a while. It's time for us to flip the record over and address the live side. Now, as we said earlier, Matt and I don't really do the live albums. We've done the big three to some extent. We did an episode about Space Ritual, which one must. It's Space Ritual. We covered Live 79 in an episode with Joe Banks, and we covered Live Chronicles in an episode with Ian Abrams. So the question is, who could we bring to the table to offer us some insight about In Your Area? Now, there are a lot of Hawkwind superfans. It's a very broad church, a lot of wonderful people with a lot of different opinions, but a shared sense of this Hawkwind journey. But one of those people has actually put his thoughts and his Hawkwind journey, his experience down on paper in a very personal book that's very much focused on the current era, the second golden age of Hawkwind, might I say, in 2 books. And in those books, he also talks about his vast array of Hawkwind concerts that he has attended. So, for example, in the first of these books, the dates of his Hawkwind gigs are listed. And in that list is September 27, 1997, Whitby Drakfest, which must have been hilariously good fun. October 21st, 1997 in Manchester, October 25th, 1997 in Stoke, and October 27th, 1997 in Leeds. So a person who has actually seen this lineup of Hawkwind do this tour live and in the flesh on no less than 4 occasions within a matter of days of each other. And that man is Paul Garbutt. Paul, welcome to Hawkbinge. Awesome to have you on. We've been waiting to do this forever. Great to have you aboard.
It's a pleasure to be here. I never imagined a few years ago that I would actually be on Hawkbinge.
Exactly that. And you've written 2 amazing books, The Second Golden Age of Hawkwind, 2017 to 2023, subtitled The 11th Second of Forever, and its follow-up, The 12th Second of Forever, 2023 to 2025. Wonderful books that we will get into a little later on, and we'll get into In Your Area live and some other aspects of your long journey with Hawkwind. But just to introduce people who don't know you, where does your Hawkwind journey begin? That's a question I asked Joe and Ian, and in fact Oz when he was on our podcast. How does it start for you?
My road to Damascus moment with Hawkwind was actually my road to college. My sister's boyfriend drove me to college in his red Ford Cortina, and on his big clunky tape system, he was playing the Hall of the Mountain Grill. And the track, you'd better believe it, it just lasted forever. This was a time when most songs lasted 2 to 3 minutes. It was unlike anything I'd ever heard before. And I was just hooked. It was just so different. And I think one of the appeals was the vocal balance between Dave Brock and Lemmy. I love that. I'd heard Silver Machine, I think, the year before, but it didn't quite hook me like this track did. And the rest is history.
So Hall of the Mountain Grill is your first album for Hawkwind. Same here, funny enough. But your live experience with Hawkwind was 77. So were you listening to Hall of the Mountain Grill when it came out? Or was it a couple of years after it had come out?
It was, I think, about 2 years after.
Okay, so you saw them live, presumably, not too long after that.
I think within a year, 1977, Newcastle City Hall. That was my first live gig. And the first song they played was Hassani Sabah with that beautiful violin. It's not the greatest Hawkwind gig I've been to, but it certainly confirmed my interest.
So all that stuff coming together, I mean, you're ahead of me with Hawkwind by 7-8 years. In terms of live, actually, about 9 years. So that just feels like an incredible time in music and culture. I'm slightly envious.
I didn't have a lot to compare them to at the time. It was only my second ever live gig. I think the first one was the Stranglers at Middlesbrough Town Hall. And then I had a coach trip up to Newcastle within a couple of weeks. And wasn't quite sure what to expect. When I heard Hassani Sibar live for the first time, I didn't really recognise it. I thought it sounds a bit like it, but it wasn't what I was expecting because I heard the beautiful version on the album.
And that's a wonderful segue, Paul, because obviously we're dealing with an album here that has both a studio and a live side. And we're going to get into the live side because that's our main excuse for getting you on and allowing us to talk about all this other wonderful stuff slightly later on. Matt and I have discussed in your area at length, as people have heard. What's your take on the studio side of this record?
If Space Ritual and Warrior on the Edge of Time are Hawkwind feasts, then Hawkwind in Your Area is a light snack. This is kind of Hawkwind in lean times. When it first came out, I didn't identify with a live side and a studio collection of tracks. It was only recently when I read the small print that it says tracks 1 to 6 were live.
Yep, that's right. It doesn't feel like a live album in terms of hearing the crowd and the cheers and things, does it? All of that seems to have been kind of stripped out.
But there is a gem on the studio side.
Mm-hmm.
It's so good, it shouldn't be on this album. And that is Hippie.
Yep, no surprise there.
I think it's a wonderful song. There's some good energy. It's structured well. I always liked Rontry. I always thought he brought a bit of menace and theatre to Hawkwind's performances at the time. He always appeared quite fearless to me in his painted body, naked torso. He was quite a personality, and I think this is one of his finest.
Standout track. No shocks there. No shocks there. So, on to the live side. And it's interesting that you started seeing Hawkwind live in 77, because that means that by 1997, you've already been seeing Hawkwind live for 20 years. At this point in our Hawkwind journeys, Matt might have heard the name, but that's about it. I'm very deep into my wilderness years, and I'm not going to see Hawkwind live at this point. I rejoined the story later on. You've kept this going over all these years. Where are you at on your Hawkwind arc by 97?
My passion for them has never really wavered. Hawkwind for me were always really good and authentic when playing live. Albums might have disappointed me occasionally, but even this particular album, I think the live side here has a lot more to offer than the studio side. There's a lot of energy in Brainstorm and Aerospace Age Inferno. I quite like the version of Brainstorm. Now, I know some people don't. The version with the reggae interlude. Now, I do remember the audience dancing quite passionately to Captain Riz. He looked the part with his dreadlocks, and he was colourful, he was energetic, and he was a welcome guest.
Matt, you struggled a little bit with Captain Riz in this one, right?
Joe Banks mentioned Captain Riz when we did the end of the 70s episode, so I've been waiting almost 20 years for him to show up. Now he's arrived, at least right now, I'm a bit disappointed, which is a shame. I think his delivery as a vocalist seems to be fine, and certainly it sounds authentic and delivered with an amount of passion and showmanship. But I think, unfortunately, he seems to have been infected with what I call distant horizon syndrome, which is where your rhyming becomes chronically lazy and you forget how many words should fit into a bar. I don't know what I was expecting, but I guess I wasn't expecting that. He kind of comes in for a lot of the down-tempo stuff. So for me, he almost feels like he's pulling things down, or he's bringing things into his area, which in comparison to all of the rock stuff, it doesn't always feel like it meshes. I think even Paul himself actually in one of the books said that albums, DVDs, YouTube could never capture that special live atmosphere. And I think now we can definitely add CDs to that list as well, because this doesn't capture the live feeling. In fact, the way that I heard it and have always been hearing it when I've been listening is that it sounds like maybe it was an old Free Festival bootleg or something. You know, it sounds like someone with a tape recorder at the side of the stage. Things come in and out. Things don't feel like they're going into a mixer. Nothing sounds particularly professional about the way it's recorded. You know, it does sound bootleggy, which I was very surprised about. I remember my parents had The Way We Walk Live by Genesis, and you know, while I'm not saying that Genesis and Hawkwind maybe have the same production budget, that was 92 and this is almost the end of the 90s. You feel like bands have been recording themselves perfectly fine for, you know, a long time. So it's kind of a shame that this is what they brought out, and I think that that really doesn't help the introduction. Suddenly hearing someone new especially someone so new after Distant Horizons, and we've already had new people. I guess Ron's been here for a little while now, but it's a new album, and then they brought in someone who wasn't in the album, which means they have to change it somehow. And we never think that Hawkwind are going to just play their album, because, as Paul said, that's not what they do, especially live. So his introduction really threw me when I was trying to listen to this, and the audio quality certainly isn't helping. The overall feeling of it is that it is a little all over the place. Comedian Dave Chappelle once said, after a bad gig, I'm like Evel Knievel, I get paid for the attempt. And I think that's what I get from this. I feel like I'm listening to Hawkwind embody that philosophy musically. I'm listening to the attempt.
It's interesting, Paul, isn't it? Because both Matt and I listened to this, and the context for us listening to it is purely what's on the tape. Whereas the beauty of you being here to chat about this is that you were there. Therefore, you're bringing your memory of the physicality of it and the experience. And I know that if I've got live albums of shows I was at, I feel a sense of communing with it in a way that I don't when I'm listening to a live album of something where I wasn't there. So your memory of the people jumping around and the physicality of it, that must come out a little bit when you listen to these tracks, those gigs you went to in 97.
Yeah, I pretty much agree with everything Matt said.
That's nice. I pretty much agree with everything Matt said. I'll try not to be offended.
That's going to be on the season 4 t-shirt.
I'm going to add that we forgive Hawkwind when some things don't quite work out, when recordings are perhaps not the quality we would like them to be, or if an experiment just goes awry. We love that. They keep trying. They try and they keep on trying and they experiment. And sometimes it doesn't work out perfectly for whatever reason. A lot of this might just be in the quality of the recording.
Yeah, very true. Very true. And they did obviously put this out in the US and then come back to it as a recording that came out in the UK. And there were some label changes and things going on. So there's a context of the time of Dave putting this out. Listening to the live side, to me, the strongest moments on it feel like those moments where Jerry is influential on the sound, that harder, rockier aspect. You mentioned Brainstorm, the early part of Brainstorm, Aerospace Age Inferno. We both love Distant Horizon, which has a lot of Jerry DNA in it, I think. Is that the same of the live at this point?
He was pretty good. He was a good foil to Dave Brock's rhythm guitar. I particularly like Alchemy on this album. It reminds me a little bit of Space Chase. It's quality lead guitar.
Yes, and other than Hugh, obviously, as the high point, Hawkwind don't generally do a lot of genuine acrobatic lead guitar. Do you have any favourites out from the live side?
I've mentioned Brainstorm. Aerospace Age Inferno has a little bit of energy to it, but it fades a little bit too early. It's just getting going, but it's not sustained. Love in Space was a little bit disappointing. This was a wonderful track when it first came out. However, the lyrics were dangerously close to Bryan Adams's Everything I Do It For You, which was number one in the charts for about 200 weeks. Maybe that's why they decided to drop the lyrics from Love in Space on this outing.
Matt, because you love Love in Space.
Yeah, but for me, Love in Space, at least on Distant Horizons, is an instrumental. We've come across Love in Space twice. The first time was White Zone, and that was instrumental. Then this version was that more kind of like groovy sort of space lounge version, which I really liked. And I actually do like the version on here for a second. And I did think it was funny because when I was researching this album, Wikipedia says that the live side was recorded to promote the Distant Horizons album. I don't think Hawkwind know what the word promote means because they've only got 2 tracks from that album on the live side, and it's Alchemy, which is less than 3 minutes, and then it's Love in Space for about 20 seconds before it goes into this rat race sandwich that they have. And Love in Space doesn't sound like the album version either, so this is almost like a third extra Love in Space. So I don't know whether or not I can say I like the Love in Space track because it's just always different all the time. I think, unfortunately, the Love in Space rat race 1-2 punch that they do was the bit that made me really lose patience with Mr. Riz a little bit, because that's when they really have trouble with the rhyming and the lyric cadence. Open up your eyes, it's time to realize, which is immediately kind of a very lazy rhyme. And then you have, it's not the rat race, you're the human race. And it's like, did you just rhyme race with race? I know that it's two different definitions of the word race, but come on. Also, everyone wants to live on Mars, but you can only live on your mother's Earth. That didn't even rhyme, and you can't get the lyrics in there. So that wins the prize for worst line I've ever heard Hawkwind do, which is impressive because I thought Sorcery to the Test was going to do that. But no, we found a new one.
I have to say that it does constantly entertain me, the fact that given that your trade has been writing, therefore you have an almost writer's OCD, which I don't really have. So I tend to end up agreeing with everything you say, but it doesn't annoy me anywhere near as much as it annoys you. You definitely come at these things from a very different angle.
Yeah, true. But I think as we've established, I'm sure if I went back and was really critical about stuff, I could find some lazy rhyming in things that I do like. But it's more like when you like it and you're caught up in it, it doesn't matter because it justifies itself. I think when I find it to point it out, it means that I'm not lost in it. So I'm starting to find things. And I guess for me, yeah, lyrics are always a big target.
It's tricky, actually, because the last two podcasts that we did, they were both albums that we were both very high on. So we are coming at this one from quite a high point. There's one or two here, Paul, that I actually quite like, which I've never heard of before. But given that they're on the live side, either they were made up on the spur of the moment or they've appeared elsewhere and I've just completely missed them. Quite small things, but I enjoy First Landing on Medusa, which is only 1 minute 41. But it's one of those bubbly synth arpeggiators going on in the background while Dave Brock tells a little story over the top. I always come back to Fall of Earth City territory on these, and I really enjoy these, and they drop them in every once in a while. There's a bit of it actually on the latest album, but it's got down, when I looked it up, as being co-authored by Brock and Calvert, which means it must be quite old.
I can't remember it. Perhaps it's just too short to have made an impression.
They drop these little things in, don't they, from time to time. And also, I very much smile at, presumably Ron Tree, his phrasing of, "I am the reptoid," always makes me smile, just that phrase.
I remember that one well. It was often played as an encore.
Oh, really?
Yeah, it was often the final track of the gig. It seems to me that on this album, it feels like it's just the second half of the song that appeared on Distant Horizons. It was quite an extended song, and he presented it very well. He did have this menace about him.
Do you know what, Andy? Actually, I was wondering about that Calvert thing because obviously we lost Calvert quite some time ago. I did a bit of research and I found someone on one of the Facebook groups that we follow mentioned that not everyone knows that Calvert's The Awakening from Space Ritual was originally the start of a longer poem called First Landing on Medusa. And so it's actually a excerpt from that poem that's just being read. So I'm assuming that Hawkwind or Dave or someone just liked that bit. So they made some instrumental music around it and just read it over. So I'm assuming they're just crediting him because it's the excerpt.
Well, now I like it even more. It's interesting that this era of Hawkwind, the kind of Jerry influence, which is very short-lived, but resulted obviously in Distant Horizons that we liked very much. This that we're less big fans of, but there's another document of this live tour and this lineup with an actual live album called Hawkwind 1997, which I don't have and didn't know existed until preparing for this particular pod. So I think we have done what we needed to do with Hawkwind in Your Area, because although Hawkwind in Your Area was our excuse to be able to get you onto the podcast, it's not really the main part of the thing that we want to talk to you about, Paul, believe it or not, because you have put out these two wonderful books. I think this was a chat I might have been having with Joe. I can't quite remember, but there are a number of wonderful Hawkwind books. Joe's book, obviously, Ian's great book. There's Carol Clark's tome. But all of the Hawkwind books have very, very different angles to them. They're not just biographies of the band written by different people, like a retelling of the same stories. Joe's book about the cultural impact, Ian's biography, but from a fan perspective, Carol's much more journalistic biography of the band. Yours is a wonderfully personal story. And obviously at this point, you've been a fan of Hawkwind since 76, 77, watching them since 77. I can imagine you storing all this up for a long, long time and thinking one day. What triggered you to actually put these books together?
I've always felt I had a book in me. You write about what you know, And I wanted to focus upon my personal feelings. I had a good collection of souvenirs, photographs, ticket stubs, all sorts of things. And about 2 years ago, I'd retired from my full-time work, and I just felt the time was right. I wanted to express and share my feelings, my memories, my emotions. My career was largely in creating publications, but for others, this was something for me. I contacted a few people and they said, great idea. So I kind of invited them to share their feelings and emotions. And practically everybody that I had a chat with was keen to contribute something of their own. So yeah, I just assembled this book and I got a nice contribution from Stuart Bladen, who I'd been chatting to for a while, but this was before I knew he was doing Hawkwind album covers. So I explained to him what I was doing. He offered to create a cover for me. So I described in words what I would like him to generate. And within a couple of days, he'd given me 2 or 3 nice designs. I said I would like a golden android against a spacey background, and he delivered.
I have to say on that point, the book covers feel to me like they very much represent the spirit of what is inside with the writing. Stuart's done you a lovely service with the book covers. They feel very authentic to the writing that's on the inside.
I tried to make the second one evolve from the first one.
Mm-hmm.
The second book, which was imaginatively called The 12th Second of Forever.
You've got many amazing contributors to your book, and we are honoured. I was going to say, we're really honoured just to be asked to be part of this.
Yeah, no one ever asked us to do any of this. So it's nice to finally be asked.
I feel your book has done very well in spite of Hawkbinge's presence within it. But it's amazing for us to be asked to contribute to both books, and thank you for that. It speaks of the network you must have built up. All of the people, like there's so many names of people who contributed to the book, some of which I've been lucky enough to meet. A lot I haven't, but they're names that I know. You've built up quite the circle of friends in your time as a Hawkwind fan.
I have. I think this was the big reward in writing the book for me, that I made contact with so many interesting people, which I had a lot in common with. A lot of these people I've since met at gigs.
There is a quote to do with Hawkwind as a live experience, which is from Joe Banks. He said, plenty of fans would attest that seeing Hawkwind in the 70s was akin to a religious event or experience, the pounding shamanic music and the consciousness-expanding visuals producing feelings of liberation and ecstasy. That's Joe Banks. Speaking about Hawkwind Live in the 70s, I would say that a lot of people who we've spoken to, and I'm guessing you as well, would actually say that that is a line that runs a lot further than the 70s.
Absolutely. That feel-good factor, that almost religious experience, certainly for me, has been consistent right through 50 years, which takes me back to the Sheffield gig, which this quote illustrates perfectly. Tonight was everything about why Hawkwind are so special. The set contained a few of the biggies, but disappointed absolutely no one because the latest album is so damn good and they played a lot from it. Beyond that, there was a lovely gathering of splendid people. And at the root of it all was the fact that the whole experience tapped into that deep vein which reminds us that we're all human beings, bumbling through life as best we can, and that in itself can sometimes unexpectedly be life-affirmingly wonderful.
Isn't that beautiful? And that's Oz for you. I love reading anything that Oz puts out. And in that sense, your book is very much focused on the live experience, and so many of the contributors focus on the live experience. We actually think of your books as being a lovely kind of counterpoint to what we do with Hawkbinge, which is obviously following the Canon studio run. Is there a particular era of Hawkwind Live that stands out for you, or do you just find joy in everything that they do live?
It's a strange answer to give, but the era that I enjoy the most is the current one. The album that I play the most often is the most recent one, There Is No Space for Us. It's so fresh, and it's evidence for this second golden age of Hawkwind that I write about. Hawkbinge is evidence of a second golden age. Yeah, the last couple of albums and the tours that have accompanied it have just been wonderful. Dave Brock's voice is as strong and as evocative as it's ever been. The song Changes on the new album is, I think, the best Hawkwind song this century. That may seem like a grand statement, but it's got everything. Every musician has something to offer. The drums are nice and clear, lots of bish bash boshing, just gets to your gut. Magnus's light guitar playing, Dave Brock's voice. It's one of those tracks that it's greater than the sum of its parts. It's the longest track on the album, but it's the track I play almost every day.
Amen to that.
They've been together about 4 years now, which is quite unusual. It's a fairly steady lineup, but they've been producing, and I just hope there's another one.
Absolutely.
Have we been threatened with one already?
I'm sure there's one on the way. There doesn't seem like there's a let-up.
There's definitely another Hawkwind book on the horizon from Chris and Dave Brock.
Oh, that'll be interesting. I love Marion's book as well. And this thing, when we started Hawkbinge, we almost felt like there really wasn't an awful lot of new Hawkwind content. But now it's amazing. And actually, the fact that you're focusing on this era of Hawkwind, we obviously use the books. We do readings from the books and we draw points from the books. And we did Joe's and Ian's, and now we're doing Ian's and Carol's. And there's a point at which those books come to an end and your books pick up. So you can kind of expect your books to become something of a staple on Hawkbinge, Paul, when we actually get to 2017. So thank you for providing us with a bit of that.
In your book, you do note that since 2016, there have been 13 large-scale publications about Hawkwind and their work. What do you think it is about the band, and this band especially, that inspires so much opinion, analysis, and documentary work?
Well, my books, there is as much a reflection of not just the music and the gigs, but it's a reflection of Hawkwind's resilience and endurance over so many years. It's only recently that a lot of people started to really appreciate what Hawkwind have done and what they've achieved. A bit like Doctor Who, they just regenerated themselves. I think that potential was always there, and they've persevered. In the last couple of years, they just blossomed.
Which gives us continued things to write about. I know you observe in your book, again, you say, in recent years, the huge backlog and diversity of material must have played havoc with creating structured sets. And I feel like that comes across in your area quite a lot. For me, that's an indication that, that havoc was quite apparent at times. Maybe, again, like you said, because of the inclusion of new bandmates and that kind of thing. And I feel like right now in their current iteration, they're all good at the space rock. You know, they don't have someone who's trying to come in and add another genre or anything necessarily. They're just doing what I guess we love them for very well.
Yeah, and they're getting better.
Mm-hmm.
You can see how, particularly the last 3 albums, we think of it as a trilogy, don't we? The first one, that was pretty good. It was a breakthrough. I loved Rama and the end and the beginning. And then the second one was a little bit more melancholy. But the latest one, There Is No Space for Us, is wonderful. I'm so impressed by this trilogy as a whole. And even the middle one sits well with the first and the third one as well.
It was fascinating to read in a lot of the stories that you published that people got into the band because people recommended them or were playing them around and got them hooked. And I even laughed when I read one of the stories. This guy, John, who was at the front of the Psychedelic Furs gig, and his friend said, if you think this is loud, you should go and see Hawkwind. And I laughed just because that feels such an arbitrary reason to recommend them. It feels like they were almost one of the original viral bands. If you know them and you like them, you have to tell people about them. And it was amazing how many of these stories all start with, a friend got me into it.
Yeah, or somebody's older brother. I mean, I've written 2 books now, but can I still put my finger on the magic of Hawkwind? I'm not sure if I can. It's there and I warm to it. But do I really want to expose the magic? I'm not so sure. Particularly live gigs. Why are they so good? I mean, I've seen lots of other bands, but no other band has consistently made me feel so good.
Someone, I don't have the name, I'm afraid, I don't think in my notes, but someone just called them the People's Band. And a lot of the stories are, I got to go backstage, or I just bumped into Dave having a pint, or like I just met like Hugh while he was tuning and that kind of stuff. It doesn't feel like there's such a separation between artist and listener that you feel like with a lot of bands. You know, normally when you go and see a gig, the band comes on, they say hi, maybe, they play their stuff, they leave, and then you assume that they will run into a tour bus and you never see them again. But it does feel like even setting up things like Hawkfests and things, that they actually do really care about their listeners. And even when we saw them in London, Andy, you know, they did their own sound check and they kind of shouted at people and got shouted at back while they were sound checking, and then just wandered off and wandered back in again. It does feel like they clearly love the performing. Doesn't even feel like they're always responsible for half of it. It feels like they just have been really good at attracting people who are motivated and want to do things. They don't just want to consume. They wanted to be part of something. And Hawkwind seems to be very nurturing. You know, they're almost like tending the garden and they're just watching what grows.
They are very approachable. I've got one story in my first book. Chris Tater sent me a backstage pass. It was actually my daughter that approached Chris, and Chris sent my daughter a backstage pass. This was about 10 years ago in Warrington. I remember going backstage after the gig, and I was stood in this long corridor, and I saw one of the dressing room doors had Dave Brock's name on it. And I took a deep breath and I went and knocked on his door and I walked straight in. The room was practically empty apart from Dave Brock and a couple of big suitcases. There wasn't even a carpet on the floor. I mean, I look back on that now and think, what was I thinking of? He could have just turned around and justifiably said, just get out. But in the event, he was so welcoming and friendly. And we had a chat for 10 or 15 minutes, talked about a lot of nonsense and my geek history and a few other things. And shortly afterwards, we both stepped outside and we took a couple of nice photos together. For me, it was just a wonderful memory. I got lucky.
Well, your book has some lovely photos of you with various members of the bands at various different times. So it's amazing that you've managed to involve yourself in it. And your books become a part of it, which is an amazing feeling.
Paul, while you're in story mode, you have to explain how you come to possess a slice of the Brock's wedding cake.
I've still got it. If you hang on 5 minutes, I could show it to you. And I've got a couple of the little figures that were stood on the cake. But yeah, I was at Dave and Chris's wedding, 2007, something like that. It was a mini Hawk Fest. Lots of lovely people, lots of them dressed up in space costumes. There must have been at least 200 guests there, just fans. They invited them to the wedding. It was in a little barn. And my daughter, who was actually about 9 at the time, if you look at all the photos, you'll see my daughter with this pink sparkly hat on. She's walking around the festival, sort of giving out drinks and pieces of wedding cake. Perhaps I should sell it on eBay.
Yeah, Andy will bid £100 for it.
The next Hawkfest.
You can wrap it in your T-shirt, Andy, and then you've got the strangest collection of Hawkwind stuff ever.
I think that's fair. A gig that we were all at was the Royal Albert Hall, the big anniversary gig that was then the double live album. There's a number of more recent shows that we've struggled to get Matt over from Berlin for, usually having had tickets and flights and everything booked and cancelling at the last minute and everything. But that was one that Matt actually managed to make. Matt, that was quite a good one from your point of view, wasn't it? Because the previous one you'd seen was the Psygnosis Festival, which wasn't really like a big full-on Hawkwind show. This one really was, right?
It was certainly the biggest we'd ever seen them, and it was really full. For me, it was really nice to see Hawkwind at scale. We'd seen them in smaller venues, not like tiny venues, but nothing like the Royal Albert Hall. And I think if there was any feeling of illegitimacy as a band that I'd ever had, it was gone with the Royal Albert Hall, because not everyone gets to be there, not everyone gets to fill it. And I thought that they played really, really well. It was certainly, they'd scaled up their performance. I think they walked around like they owned the place. So to have seen them in that little Brighton venue the very first time, to then see them just absolutely batter out some of their best work at the Royal Albert Hall, that was quite something.
It stands out for me just as an event amongst all the Hawkwind gigs I've been to. It felt like, speaking to people outside, quite a unique one, rather than just a date on a tour.
Paul, you wrote about it, and I know that on the whole, you seem to be reasonably positive with it. I think it was a 4-star gig for you. The actual thing that I thought was really interesting in the Royal Albert Hall gig was the fact that they had tailor-made videos for each track that they played. And I don't think that you ever really mentioned them at all. And I was wondering what you thought about those.
Yeah, I think that a key person in the production of these new videos was Stuart Bladen, the guy who produced my book covers and has designed and produced the last 2 or 3 Hawkwind album covers.
So, Paul, this book, I have to say, as a fan and on a long journey, not as long, and starting at a very different point in time. But there are so many of your experiences which feel like shared experiences, because certainly at the ones I was also at, it just reflects for me so much of what I've loved about the band. So I definitely recommend these books. Beg, Borrow or Steal, what you can get. They're wonderful books. And you have a particularly interesting one to offer up as a little bit of a prize for a question that we're going to ask.
Oh, yes. My first book, The Second Golden Age of Hawkwind, subtitled The 11th Second of Forever, is no longer available. They've sold out. But I do have one copy left, but it's quite unusual because this copy was printed upside down and back to front. So if you want to read it, you have to turn the book upside down and read it from the last page and then flick back. I'll throw in a copy of my second book as well, which is printed properly.
Amazing. Tell you what, just to make it a whole bundle, we'll throw in a Hawkbinge t-shirt to save the bees.
That's a mighty prize,
That's
that.
quite a mighty prize right there. And all you've got to do is give us the name of a Hawkwind track that has the word Hawkwind in the lyrics. Send us an email. What's the email address, Matt?
It's podcast@hawkbinge.space.
There you go. Podcast@hawkbinge.space. Send us your answer. We will get all of the correct answers together by the time we record the next episode. We will randomly draw one, and the winner will receive the massively valuable Discogs misprint of the first book. Together with that, the second book, the 12th Second of Forever, and a Hawkbinge t-shirt, and we will mail those to you. So, Paul, thank you so much for coming on and chatting about Hawkwind in your area, your own Hawkwind journey, and your wonderful books. Unless you manage to run and hide and change your identity, we will be back calling upon you for future Hawkbinge episodes.
Well, thank you. And can I publicly thank a couple of people that encouraged me to complete my books? Brian Torn, Stuart Bladen, Ian Abrahams, who was very positive towards my efforts, and my daughter Rebecca, who not only proofread the book, but inspired me just to complete it. And I love it to bits.
Fantastic. And well done for actually passing on the torch. The future of Hawkwind fandom is in good hands. Wonderful stuff. We will hear from Paul again because of his excellent books and look forward to the third in the series. Hopefully there'll be many more. So thanks very much, Paul.
Thank you very much indeed. It's been a pleasure and a privilege.
So that was Paul Garbutt. How cool was that to get Paul onto the show, chat about his wonderful books, and obviously get his take on the live side of In Your Area, thus completing the music from the record. We now take a look at the artwork that accompanies this release. This is by someone called Robert Godwin, and I know nothing whatsoever about Robert Godwin other than the fact that he is credited with the artwork when I did a search to try and find who the artist was for the album cover. So it was an AI search, and the source for the data was revealed to be Discogs. This, in 1999, Matt, smacks of MTV to me.
It does, doesn't it? The front cover has a very MTV tone to me, with the pop culture astronaut with a flag, which became their network identity.
Yeah.
I was wondering perhaps if this was like a punky send-up of MTV, because I'm sure that MTV wasn't playing their music.
Yes, that's very well said. I would imagine that could be a little bit of sarcasm.
After we complained that the last album's artwork was drab and uninspired, they've massively overcorrected on this one to produce something that's garish and borderline incomprehensible. So good for them, I guess.
The colour scheme is bold, let's say. I do like the version of the Hawkwind logo that they stuck on the flag. That's pleasingly retro.
Yeah, which kind of makes it sound like the MTV astronaut would rather be listening to Hawkwind over anything you listed in the releases at the start of the podcast. And given that we've got Westlife and Britney Spears, you think that might actually be true?
I think it probably is. And if this is a massively garish send-up of MTV, then it's actually more successful than I previously would have given it credit for.
Yeah, and I think even though it's massively garish, there is a feeling of consistency because the background of these lurid, acid-washed rings that look either like menacing eyes or maniacal bicycle wheels, they were actually used as part of the live stage set design, as we can see from the inserts in the CD cover. So there is a strong visual connection to the design and performance, which is nice.
That's good. Yeah, it shows that there's some thought attached to it. I remember on Distant Horizons, the story was, I think it was the manager who did it in about 45 minutes on Paint Shop Pro, and you replicated it in about 10 minutes using modern technologies. So at least that means that there is a concept to it. I'd be very surprised if MTV was not in the mind of Robert Godwin when he put this together. And then there's a thought process that links the concept to Hawkwind and their stage show. So there's a lot more thought gone into this than went into Distant Horizons.
I guess the problem you get with the end of 90s, early 2000s production is that it's an interesting idea that wasn't amazingly realized. The text, for example, looks like it's come straight out of Adobe Photoshop 5, which was released in 1999. It was actually the first Photoshop I ever played with as an early teen. You know, it's a very basic layering job with big, blurry red glow effects added to a rather uninspired font to try and squeeze out some dynamism in it. You know, it's not super impressive.
Yeah.
Although it is interesting that In Your Area is all lowercase, which we know is very en vogue for how younger generations write with no capitalization right now. I don't remember if that was a thing back in 1998, 1999, but in 2025 it has become so. So maybe Hawkwind's designer was a visionary.
The back cover is an explosion of colours and things. It's very Hawkwind, this back cover, isn't it?
In a way, I mean, it's massively chaotic. There's a colourful illustration of a rocket with a bright ball of light erupting from its midsection that looks like either the warp core breached or some other sci-fi ailment has stricken it, or possibly it's the reflected light of a star shining off its very shiny exterior. It's really impossible to tell. The space around the ship is like a nebula, but much more colourful than a black star field, although, you know, white dots of stars can be made out over the background. There's this overlaid photo of one of the band members, possibly topless, playing a badass-looking guitar. So I guess we can assume it's Brock, Chadwick or Tree, but their face is lost in this sort of purple miasma, so I can't really tell exactly who that is personally. Maybe a real Hawkwind fan could immediately tell who that is, but not my first-time viewer eyes. Then we get into the informational part, and the track listing and associated information is written in yellow over the messy space background, which makes it almost impossible to read. It's like trying to read newspaper copy over a magic eye print, you know? The live and studio parts of the album are not made clear on the back, so if I bought this album and had questions about what was going on, the album cover was not going to help me.
No, indeed. I think that is Ron. And the reason I'm going to say that's Ron is because that looks like a bass guitar to me.
It does, yeah.
I'm going by what the guitar looks like, by what the person looks like, which is hard to say. As you say, the writing is hard to make out and hurts my brain. But the multicolored rocket with the warp core breach, which was my thought also, this feels like Hawkwind being Hawkwind, where Distant Horizons was less considered. And this might not be that considered. It might just be a hodgepodge of different things thrown together, but it's a hodgepodge of things thrown together in a very Hawkwindy, pleasing way.
Yeah, more thematic, for sure.
Yes, exactly. So that's the cover, and that, therefore, is the album. It remains for me to read a couple of things from Carol and Ian, which are particularly to do with Captain Riz, because we weren't massively keen on Riz's additions to the live side of the album, and I'm sure he was a very popular figure live, etc., but it didn't really massively work for us. So I wanted to try and see whether is this just us not gelling with Riz. And in Carol Clark's The Saga of Hawkwind, there's a little fun bit here. It says, extra visual interest was supplied by Captain Riz, who had been making guest appearances with Hawkwind since the Strange Days Festival. He was brilliant, I've got to say, smiles Ron Tree. I really enjoyed working with him. He should have been kept in the band. A doubtful Chris Tate opines, at the start of the tour, he came on and did the odd bit of reggae singing. Towards the end of it, he was staying on a lot longer. He started doing this jamming thing with Ron. The fans either loved him or hated him, and some of them really hated him. But he was great on the things that he did well. He's a great character. He once stood for Parliament against Glenda Jackson. I love that idea. He does sound like fun. Again, going back to the record collector, when it gets to Captain Riz, this is Ian talking about the live side. And he says, there's an attacking version of Brainstorm spoiled by dissolving into the bemusing cod reggae Hawkwind in your area toasting from regular late 90s guest vocalist Captain Riz, with its risible refrain of jump up and down, throw yourself around, Hawkwind in your area, Hawkwind in your land. We see what Riz was getting at, but still. So I don't think we're alone. I love the idea of Captain Riz, but didn't massively work for us and sounds like we're not on our own with that. At this point, we've traditionally asked where albums are in the top 40. And by top 40, we mean the Hawkwind fans' worldwide Facebook top 40 albums. And amazingly, in your area, it's not in the top 40. Doesn't make any appearance whatsoever. It doesn't appear in the top live albums because is it a live album? And it doesn't appear in the top studio albums because is it a studio album? It's number 3 in a list of EPs and oddities, of which there are about 10, none of which you'll have heard from because we haven't done any of them. But for listeners, Zones is number 1 in that list, and Zones is genuinely pretty good. And last on that list is Out and Intake, which I haven't heard in a very long time, but I remember not thinking it was as bad to be the bottom of that list. And there's a lot of other stuff in there that I'd not even heard of, let alone listened to. And In Your Area comes in at number 3 in the EPs and oddities list, which is probably about right.
Glad that it didn't make the top 40 if White Zone didn't make the top 40. Because if this had come in and White Zone hadn't been counted, I was going to be furious. So I guess there's some kind of justice there for me.
Absolutely. And I seem to remember that Distant Horizons was bottom of the 90 studio albums list.
Yeah.
So whether this didn't make the studio albums list because nobody thought of it as a studio album, or whether it didn't make the list because nobody really liked it, I don't know. But Distant Horizons being bottom still feels like a chronic injustice to me. Matt, we cannot make selections from this to put on our playlists because we only have the amazing Charlie Morrison's YouTube playlist to select from, and our playlists are on Spotify. But were we to do so, I think I can guess what the 2 would be.
I think being unable to add tracks to this album because it's not on streaming services might elicit a kind of, oh no, from people who are sarcastically thinking about that. But it's a shame that in a world where more music is getting uploaded every day than any one person could ever hope to listen to, albums that were made and released from times past are not included in that infinitely growing collection. We do find ourselves in a very strange media landscape for this to only survive on YouTube and therefore only be available to us because fans have done so. But if it was on streaming, my picks would probably be Hippie and Diana Park, or Prairie and Diana Park, depending on my mood.
Interesting.
I think probably I would have gone with Hippie and Diana Park to not be a massive contrarian. But then you're stuck with the 2 kind of competent, in bunny quote, tracks that they produced. And I do feel like Prairie might have been nice to add to that just because it has a little bit more imagination and whimsy to it, maybe, and therefore a bit more character and maybe a bit more soul than even something that Diana Park or Hippie had. I guess both Hippie and Prairie could actually work. Maybe I'd kick out Diana Park. Actually, now I think about it, now I'm saying it out loud, I'd probably go Hippie and Prairie, and it would be a coin toss as to which one goes on which playlist, to be honest.
Well, you got there because I went in thinking, well, it's Hippie and Prairie, isn't it? And then you didn't do that. And then you kind of talked yourself into it by the end. So well done. It's been a difficult one. It's been a bit of a challenge. We've found, as we try to do, some positive, and there are definitely interesting things going on, even if they're not necessarily things we love. There's interesting things that we found to talk about that hopefully you've got into. But I kind of want to leave the chat about In Your Area on a very positive note. And I'm able to do that thanks to Ian and his piece. If you can find it, by the way, I'm sure it's around. Ian clearly feels the same way, wanting to leave on a positive note in his article. So I'll leave In Your Area with this. In Your Area did show that, in a period of lull, there was still a drive to find the next sound, the next incarnation of what Hawkwind could be. So just be creative, even if that creativity didn't necessarily set them on the right path again. We survived by hand to mouth, just keeping our heads above water, reflected Chadwick. At least we had the time to devote to doing what we loved. And Brock, in an online Q&A, confirmed, I am on Hawkwind duty every week. We are not dead, only sleeping. In Your Area, then, is an album to serve a purpose with a couple of genuine high points. Well said, Ian. I think that's a good place to wrap on In Your Area. We have other things to come. We have plans. This is the last one of the season, which means that what is left to do for us is the decade wrap-up, which we'll do with a very special guest. That will be fun. The 90s provide a lot of really fun things, and we'll find out orphan tracks and have a good chat. That will be a very, very fun way for us to open 2026. Following which, of course, will be season 4 and the 2000s, which is going to be quite a short season because literally there's only about 3 releases.
We can probably knock that out in a year, can't we?
Yeah, exactly. So that's coming, but that will be the lull before the storm, because season 5, which is the 2010s, becomes an album a year until you reach now. So season 5 will be enormous.
Nice. Looking forward.
Yes, indeed. Indeed so. We're probably too late in the day for people to be thinking, I'll buy a Hawkbinge t-shirt for my friend for Christmas, because you maybe actually have unwrapped everything by now. But there's been quite a lot in the press about bees recently, and there is no better way to save the bees than to buy Hawkbinge merch, because we give all the money that we make to the British Bee Charity. We remain and are committed to being a proudly money-losing operation. This is done through Skull Prints. They are wonderful. We pay them, and all the money that would come our way goes to the British Bee Charity. Check that out. Of course, there will be a new design coming soon, because season 4 will be upon us. So do check those out. Thanks to everyone for sticking with us, and do find us, do chat. We love that. It's brilliant reading the things that you say about listening to Hawkwind and listening to Hawkbinge. And above all, assuming we're the right side of it, have a very, very happy Christmas. Or if not, I hope you had a very, very happy Christmas and have a very happy New Year. Or if we're on the wrong side of that, I hope you had a very happy Christmas and a very happy New Year and are having a very happy 2026 so far.
And remember, we are never dead, but sometimes we are sleeping.
Technicians of Spaceship Earth, you have been listening to Hawkbinge, the Hawkwind podcast. It was devised and presented by Andy Hood and Matt Longstaff. The soundtrack was produced by Dissonant. To contact the show, drop us a message on Facebook, Instagram, or X, the artist formerly known as Twitter, by searching @Hawkbinge, or send an email to podcast@hawkbinge.space. Hawkbinge is a proud member of the Deep Dive Podcast Network. To find more great band and music-focused podcasts like this one, head to @DeepDivePodNet on Twitter and dive in. Thank you as always for listening. We'll see you next time. In the company of a long-term fan, which is me, and your favourite first-time listener, which is Matt. Hello, Matt.
Hello, Andy. What a time it is to have seen you.
Indeed, happy Hawkbinge.
Wait, sorry, I can't. That was the worst. Wasn't even a sentence.
Do you want me to do the whole thing again?
That's how long it's been.
How long it's been.
Oh my God. Sorry, I thought I've had 7 months to come up with something clever, and I managed to mess up the first line of the night.